Good evening. Before I start, I would like just to remind you all, please, to turn off your cell phones so that we don't have any extraneous noises disturbing the sanctity of tonight's observance. I want to welcome and thank you all for being here for this important commemoration of Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. I'm Rabbi Bonnie Margulis. I'm the interim rabbi at Beth Hillel Temple here in Kenosha. I want to thank the members of the planning committee for putting together tonight's observance. You can find their names on the back of the program book. And to Indian Trails High School and the orchestra and the choir and the students for hosting us and for presenting at tonight's observance. I also want to thank the Holocaust Education Resource Center for their help and guidance in putting together tonight's service and providing us with our speaker. And thank you to Jeff Bader for being our speaker tonight and sharing his family's story. With every passing year, it becomes more and more important to hold these events. As the events of the Holocaust recede ever further into the past and pass out of living memory, we cannot allow the realities of the brutal murder of 6 million Jews to become a piece of dusty history, as remote and as distant as the Peloponnesian War. As we're approaching the 90th anniversary of the imposition of the Nuremberg Laws, the first act of the Nazis to enshrine their racist and anti-Semitic laws into action, which planted the seeds for the final solution, the Holocaust. As we approach that anniversary, the generation that experienced the Holocaust firsthand and are the primary witnesses to its horrors are dying out. Soon we will no longer be able to meet and hear from those who have personal testimony to share with us. No longer will we see people with numbers tattooed on their arms. No longer will we hear their memories of shattering losses, moments of heroism, and the joy of liberation. And so it becomes more vital than ever that we hear from survivors, from their children and their grandchildren, and that those of us who've been privileged to know survivors and hear their stories pass those stories and those memories on to subsequent generations. In the wake of the Holocaust, the Jewish community pledged to bear witness and never to forget the atrocities of the Nazi regime. Beyond the imperative to bear witness is also the responsibility to speak out when we see this kind of ethnic and religious hatred happening again. We all have a duty and a responsibility to resist tyranny wherever we see it, around the world and even here at home. But we cannot take actions against the horrors of the present if we allow ourselves to forget the horrors of the past. And the frightening thing is that almost as soon as the Holocaust ended, Holocaust denial began. Holocaust denial has become something of a cottage industry. But in some ways, even more disturbing than outright denial is simply the lack of basic knowledge and awareness today of the events of the Holocaust. A recent survey across all 50 states revealed 63% of respondents did not know that 6 million Jews had been murdered. 36% thought, well, it's 2 million or fewer. 48% of respondents cannot name a single concentration camp or ghetto, and 49% report seeing Holocaust denial or distortions on social media. And a very disturbing finding was that 11% of respondents thought that the Jews caused the Holocaust. On a more positive note, there was overwhelming support for Holocaust education. 80% of respondents favored requiring Holocaust education in schools, in part so that it does not happen again. In state-specific responses, Wisconsin was found to score the highest in Holocaust awareness. And I believe that's largely due to the tremendous efforts of the Holocaust Education Resource Center to create curricular materials and to bring workshops and educational programming to schools all around the state that's had a tremendous impact on students' knowledge and understanding. So I thank you all for being here tonight, for being part of the effort to learn and to teach and to keep the reality of the Holocaust present for people, particularly for our young people. But I also want to say, as important as these observances are, as a Jew, I do not want to be known only by the worst thing that has ever happened to my people. I also want to celebrate and to lift up what is good and great about Judaism: Jewish culture, Jewish art, music, literature, languages, Jewish food, dance, to lift up the contributions that Jews have made to science, to technology, to medicine. If we only focus on the tragedy and lose sight of the joy, we've given Hitler his victory. And so I invite us all, come to these Holocaust observances, help spread this knowledge and understanding, but also learn what is joyful and beautiful about Judaism, what has kept the Jewish community vital and alive for 4,000 years. There's much to mourn in our history, but there's also much to celebrate. I hope our Kenosha community will find many opportunities to share celebrations as well as times of mourning. And in that way, we will build a community of love and friendship and understanding where hate will have no room to thrive. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may that be God's will.
Hello, thank you all for coming. My name is Janelle Ebner. I'm a special education teacher for Kenosha Unified School District, and I am a Holocaust educator. I am going to introduce our Indian Trail students who are about to do some readings, and I would just like to tell you a little bit about that. 6 candles are kindled for the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust and for those who shared their fate. The 7th candle is kindled for all who risked their lives to rescue Jewish neighborhoods and friends.
After being deported to Auschwitz, Alla Gertner took fate into her own hands. Upon arrival, she was assigned to forced labor at a nearby armaments factory. After learning that they were going to be killed, Gertner, along with fellow female prisoners, began smuggling gunpowder and explosives from the factory with plans to destroy one of the crematoriums. During the uprising in October 1944, the prisoners killed 3 guards. They also set fire to crematorium 4, making it inoperable. The guards crushed the revolt and killed almost all the prisoners involved in the rebellion. The Jewish women, including Gertner, who had smuggled the explosives into the camp, were publicly hanged in early January 1945.
This piece was printed in a pamphlet distributed by the White Rose Movement, a group of college students who opposed the Nazi regime. Germans. Do you and your children want to suffer the fate that befell the Jews? Do you want to be judged by the same standards as your traducers? Are we to be forever a nation which is hated and rejected by all mankind? No. Dissociate yourselves from National Socialist gangsterism. Prove by your deeds that you think otherwise. A new war of liberation is about to begin. The better part of the nation will fight on our side. Cast off the cloak of indifference you have wrapped around you. Make the decision before it is too late. Do not believe the National Socialist propaganda which has driven the fear of Bolshevism into your bones. Do not believe that the Germans' welfare is linked to the victory of National Socialism for good or ill. A criminal regime cannot achieve a German victory. Separate yourselves in time from everything connected with National Socialism. The leaders of the White Rose movement were captured and killed.
Raoul Wallenberg was a man of outstanding individual courage, humanity, and decisiveness. By the end of the Second War, Raoul Wallenberg, a young architect and businessman, saved the lives of tens and thousands of Hungarian Jews. At the time, 450,000 Jews were deported from Hungary. All of them perished. Among other measures Wallenberg took to save people's lives, and one of the first things he did was to hand out protected passports, Schutzpass, and set up safe houses for Jews. The blue passport with 3 yellow corners symbolizing the Swedish state were provisional passports giving Jews the status of Swedish citizens. Thanks to these passports, at least some Jews could escape the fate of being brought to different labor camps, mainly at the Australian border by trains or in death marches.
Testimony from Max Grossblatt from Dubno, Poland. He joined the resistance at 19 years of age. When I joined in February 1943, they knew they could depend on me because I was not afraid. I didn't care if I got killed. I was there to kill as many as I could to take revenge. We blew up bridges, and when German trains were going to the front with ammunition and weapons, we put dynamite under the tracks. You had to hide and pull a string to ignite it. Nobody wanted that job, but I did. They called me Mishka the Fearless. Not all the Jewish people went to death like sheep. Some of us were fighting.
Gisela Piper was a college student when the Nazis came to power. She joined the anti-Nazi underground. In the resistance, there was no glory, no reward. Even distributing leaflets was death. I stood in my solitary cell and said, "The worst thing is that nobody will know that I was even a decent person." The Hamburg prison was filled with political prisoners. I was there a very short time, but 6 weeks is an eternity if you think you'll be in solitary for the rest of your life. Christmas night, I heard them pulling out one person after another and beating them mercilessly. One day, I heard a lot of shouting, and I looked out a peephole and saw with my own eyes a man literally hunted to death like an animal. They made him run, then jump, run, lie down, jump, throw himself down, and jump up until blood spurted out of his mouth and he was dead.
A report from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Today is the 9th day that the ghetto fights back. SS and Wehrmacht formations lay siege to the ghetto. Artillery and flamethrowers are employed, and aeroplanes shower high explosives and bombs on 40,000 Jews who remain in the ghetto. The Germans mine and blast blocks of houses where the residents have put up resistance. The ghetto is burning, and smoke covers the whole city of Warsaw. Men, women, and children who are not burnt alive are being murdered en masse. Mouths of drain pipes are blocked by German guards. The Jews fight back furiously and have killed and wounded about 1,000 of the enemy. They burn factories and stores of the German war industry. The Polish population marvels at the spirit of Jewish defense. The reaction of the Germans is that of shame and rage. The Jewish Fighting Organization addressed a proclamation to the people of Warsaw, and the Polish Workers' Parties paid tribute to the fighters of the ghetto. Only the power of the United Nations can offer immediate and effective help now. On behalf of the million Jews burnt and murdered and buried alive, on behalf of those fighting back, and all of us condemned to die, we can call to the whole world. It's imperative that the powerful retaliation of the United Nations shall fall upon the bloodthirsty enemy immediately, and in some distant future, in a way which will make it quite clear what the retaliation is for. Our closest allies must at last understand the degree of responsibility for such apathy in face of an unparalleled crime committed by the Nazis against a whole nation, of which the tragic epilogue is being enacted now. The heroic rising without precedent in history of doomed sons of the ghetto should at last awaken to the world to deeds commensurate with the gravity of the hour.
Rosa Rabata was part of a group of women working in the nearby Union munitions factory that enabled the rebellion in Birkenau, a revolt during which the Jews blew up 2 crematoriums and killed several Nazis. Her role was to smuggle gunpowder to the Sonderkommando units working in the gas chambers who were participating in the revolt. Here is the testimony of the last time she was seen before her execution. I entered Rosa's cell. On the cold concrete floor lay a figure looking like a bundle of worn-out clothes. At the sound of the door opening, she turned to face me. I almost didn't recognize her. Her face stayed the same. They looked gloomy and sad. Moments passed before a heavy sigh broke out from her heart. She then spoke her last words I did not tell, as she wanted her friends to know that they don't need to be afraid. We must continue. It was easier for her to know dying that we continued our mission. It's a pity for life, and that's how she left the world. What was she doing? She was not sorry for her actions, and that is how she died. She gave me a letter for the members that remained alive. She signed it, "Be strong and courageous." It was a time for me to go, and I left the bunker. It was the last time I saw her face, but the image of her was one I will never forget.
Spiritual resistance refers to attempts by individuals to maintain their humanity, personal integrity, dignity, and sense of civilization in the face of Nazi attempts to dehumanize and degrade them. Generally, spiritual resistance may refer to the refusal to have one's spirit broken in the midst of the most horrible degradations. Cultural and educational activities, maintenance of community, documentation, and clandestine religious observances are 3 examples of spiritual resistance. Jews smuggled books and manuscripts into many ghettos for safekeeping and opened underground libraries in numerous ghettos. Concerts, lectures, theatrical productions, cabarets, and art contests took place in many ghettos despite the hardships of daily life.
Hannah Senesh was a young Hungarian-born Jewish woman. She was one of the 32 Jewish volunteer parachutes from Palestine
that the British Army sent behind from the German lines for the resistance and rescue efforts. On June 7, 1944, Senesh tried to infiltrate German-occupied Hungary. Authorities captured her as she was trying to cross the border into the country. They tortured her for several months, but she never betrayed her colleagues. Senesh was eventually convicted of treason and was executed. She was 23 years old, and here are one of her poems. To die, so young to die. No, no, not I. I love the warm, sunny skies, the light, song, shining eyes. I want no war, no battle cry. No, no, not I.
Have to gather myself together after that performance. Brought a tear to my eye. Thank you, Indian Trail Choir and Director John Che, for that. That was beautiful. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce our speaker tonight. Jeff Better was born in 1954 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He is married to Heidi Ratner with 2 grown daughters, Joy and Beth, and 2 grandchildren, Arthur and Gwen. Excuse me, I need to just gather myself together a little bit after that. In 1972, he graduated from Washington High School and earned his master's in library science from UWM in 2008. Currently, he is a librarian at Milwaukee Area Technical College. Jeff earned Holocaust certificates from Yad Vashem, Echoes and Reflections, and Zeckelman Holocaust Center. He used to accompany his father and Howard Melton, another Holocaust survivor, to schools around Milwaukee and Eau Claire as they spoke to students. He believes in educating people, especially the young, about the uniqueness of the Holocaust and also the similarities to other genocides and atrocities. And with this, I would like to introduce our speaker tonight, Jeff Better.
Hello. Well, thank you for inviting me here tonight to let me tell you the story about my father, Albert Better. By the way, he's 97 years old, and he's living with my brother back in Bayside. He used to come to schools to give talks up until a couple of years ago, but it just got a little bit too hard for him. I had always thought that I would, at some point, take up speaking for him when he wasn't able to anymore. As was said earlier, the survivor generation is dwindling, and we want to, keep the story going. So myself, we are known as the second generation, right? We're second gen. So how many people here actually heard a survivor speak? Okay, not that many. I mean, a few, but some of the younger people maybe never heard a survivor speak. There's nothing like the real thing, but us second gen, we try to do the best we can to tell the story. So yeah. So now with the choir coming in the back, I'm guessing that there's at least 100 people in this room, right? Just as a round number. So what I do for some of the younger classes is I'll say, okay, I want everybody to count off by tens. Just go all the way around and just go count off by 10. I'm not going to have you do that. And then I'll say, okay, I just want all the tens to stand up. And when they do, I'll say, this is the percentage of Jews that survived in my dad's hometown. It was 1 out of 10. And he was from a town called Kovno, which is in Lithuania. And Lithuania is one of the Baltic states in Eastern Europe. And before the war, let's see, there was 6 kids. My father had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. So there were 6 kids and a mother and a father. And they lived in Kovno, which is now called Kaunas actually. But that was the capital of Lithuania. And Lithuania was always kind of in the middle between Russia and Germany and Russia and Poland. And if you look at the history, they're constantly fighting back and forth and who's controlling this territory. And Lithuania was actually very good to the Jews for a long time. Jews were in Lithuania for like 1,000 years, and they managed to do pretty well there. I mean, they were always a minority, but Lithuania was almost like a democratic country for a while. But then when the war started, they got torn kind of apart between Russia invading and then Germany invaded. So for the Jews there, it was always difficult. If you were a communist, you were on the wrong side. If you were a capitalist, you were on the wrong side. So it was a no-win situation for the Jews in Kovno. Although growing up, Dad said that while there was anti-Semitism, it wasn't horrible. He'd give the example of like when they would play soccer, the Jewish team, which was called Maccabi, they would play the Gentile team. And if the Jewish team won, those guys better look out because they would get a rap on the head from the losing team. So there was anti-Semitism, but again, it wasn't horrible. There was 30,000 Jews in a city of 160,000 in Kovno. So it was a pretty good size of Jewish population there. And there were schools there. There were yeshivas that go way back. It was actually, Lithuania was really sort of the center of the Yiddish culture in Europe. I mean, it was in other places too, but to be a Litvak meant that you were really something special in terms of Jewish learning and religiosity. Dad wasn't very religious. The family was not super religious. His father went to synagogue now and then. He did a few things like wrapping tefillin. You may have seen that. But they tried to send Dad to see this rabbi, and he tells the story of sitting on the rabbi's lap, and the rabbi had a nasty red beard, and he was spitting, and he smelled bad, and so that was it for Dad. He really couldn't follow through with the religious part. Although when I go to him to synagogue now, he knows all the prayers, and he sings all the songs, and he's as religious as can be. So he picked up something back then. Okay, so June 21st, 1941, Dad had won a math contest. He was 13. He was 13 years old, so he was in middle school. He won a math contest, so he got to go to a summer camp near the Baltic Sea. So it was a seaside situation with young people from all over. There was Gentile children and Jewish children, and he described it was just a wonderful time. You know, they were swimming, they were playing volleyball, they were singing songs, they had a bonfire at night, and that's how they went to sleep, just having a wonderful time. And probably like 3 a.m, they were awakened by the sound of artillery. So the Nazis had invaded. They had started Operation Barbarossa, where they were eventually going to attack Russia. Where did it start? In Kovno. That's where it started. So the Jews in Kovno were out there without any protection, without any form of self-defense really, and it started almost immediately, even before the Nazis got there. The Lithuanian people themselves, not all of them, but a good amount, already started the attacks on Jewish people. In a way, he was lucky that he was away at this camp, because he wasn't in Kovno at that time. But anyhow, so what happened is they start running, right? The bombs start dropping at 3 a.m, right? So what do? They grab their clothes, whatever they have, and they start running. Where are they running to? Right? They're running north, trying to get into Russia, into Latvia, into Russia. That seemed the best place to go. Of course, the soldiers caught up to them quickly, and brought them back to the Palanga, to the seaside city, and they separated the Jewish kids from the Gentile kids, and there were other Jewish people there also from that area. So they put all the Jewish people in a synagogue. They put them in a synagogue. I think they were in there for about 2 days. There were a lot of people, maybe a couple hundred people. There was no water. There was no way to go to the bathroom, and they couldn't breathe because it was stuffy and so many people and young children. And fortunately, one of the German officers gave the order to break the windows. And what they did was they defaced a holy building, but in doing so, they let the air in, and it actually saved them. So Dad's story is full of little things like that where you'd say, well, was that luck? Or, was that meant to happen? We were never sure. But they were lucky, actually, that happened. There was a time where they had to stand outside, and the Nazis they wanted all the men between 18 and 55 to step forward. And so the Jewish men stepped forward, they loaded them on a truck, and they took off. And Dad says that a little while later, a Lithuanian woman came running up and said in Lithuanian that they shot them. They shot all the men. And he says, Dad says to him, that was the beginning of the nightmare when that happened. They stayed in Palanga for about 2 weeks. One of the things that they made them do was to go into the synagogue and to burn the holy books. And Dad always says that was the worst day of the whole 4 years. The worst day of the whole 4 years was having to do that. And they made them do it in a manner where they would burn things from 6 corners, like the Jewish star, right? That's how they would make them burn the books. So it wasn't just that they were doing terrible things, but they were doing it in such a mean way. Humiliation. So they had to do that. And then after a couple of weeks, they actually were able to go back to Kovno. I guess people in Kovno got together some money, and they brought the kids back in buses. So they brought them back. And so now it's like July, the middle of July of 1941, and food is scarce, and now there are rules that the Jews have to follow. If they're walking down the street and they see a Nazi, they have to walk behind them. They have to take off their cap. This is about the time where they have to start wearing the yellow star on the front and the back to indicate that they're Jews. Food is getting to be a big problem. At one point, it became illegal for the Jews to even go out to a store. So how do you get food? This was an issue of survival. It was in August that the ghetto started, that they actually created a ghetto. And they did this by actually having what they called an action. And they had actions where they would round up people, round up Jews, and they would take them to a place. They called it a fort. Kovno was ringed by 9 forts that had been built by the Tsar in the 19th century. Now they were using those forts as killing fields. And so when they would kill a couple thousand people, now there was more room in the ghetto. And so Dad's family and all others, they were constantly moving, trying to find another place to live, a 1-bedroom or maybe a schoolhouse, whatever it was. So the ghetto now was rung with barbed wire. There was barbed wire all the way around it, and the Jews, that's where they had to stay. And how are they going to find food? Smuggling. Smuggling was a big way to stay alive. Potatoes were the staple. How do you get potatoes? You sneak out of the ghetto, and you find a place where there are potatoes, and either you steal them, or if you have something to trade, you trade them. So one of Dad's sisters, Aunt Luba, was very brave, and she's the one that would actually go out and try to find potatoes or try to steal them or smuggle them. She was blonde and blue-eyed, so she didn't look Jewish. So when she got out, she was okay. So Dad's job was to lift up the barbed wire so she could sneak underneath and then go do her potato thing. And it worked really well, except one night it had snowed, and for some reason Dad did not wipe away her footprints in the snow. Not sure why. And so she was caught, taken to the police station, and given 25 lashes with a whip. And he said you could see all 25 lashes. So he always felt bad about that. Didn't do it on purpose. It was just, I don't know, he just can't explain what happened. But that shows you going into winter now it's August, things are going to get real rough with food. The other thing that the Nazis were doing is they were robbing the people. They were just basically robbing people. They would knock on the door and say they were looking for gold. They called that the gold action, right? If you had any gold, you had to bring that to them. If you didn't, and they found that you still had gold, you could be shot. So they were just trying to steal anything of value, furniture, clothing, furs, things like that. So they were basically robbing the people. And one thing that Dad had of value that he didn't want to give them was his stamp collection. So back in the day, that was an activity that young people did. They liked to collect stamps. So maybe some people here ever did that, where you would collect stamps from all over the world, right? So whatever little money he had, he would buy stamps, and he had some kind of an album that he put them in, and that was his passion. He just enjoyed that. But when they came for the stamp collection, rather than give it to them, he burned it. He burned his stamp collection. So try to imagine a game that you have or something you really enjoy, but rather than give it to them, you destroyed it. He burned it. And I think that is, I always sort of consider that a type of resistance, right? You guys were talking about all this resisting tyranny with like the partisans with guns and blowing things up and that, which is great. But like Dad didn't have anything like that. So what was he going to do to resist? How could he resist? And I always thought that was one way that he resisted. Later on, much later in life, I bought him a stamp collection. And I thought maybe that could, kind of jumpstart him back into it. But he wasn't into it anymore. So, but I tried. So it is October 28th, 1941. That's what they call the Big Action. And all the Jews, there was about 27,000 that were left. They all had to meet in a big field. It was called Democrato Plaza, of all things, Democrato Plaza. And while they were there was a table set up in the middle of the field, and there was a German sergeant, Sergeant Rauke, by the way, that was his name. And you would come up in front of him as a family, and then he would go left, right, just like that. He would kind of eyeball the family. I'm not sure what criteria he was using, although you had to be able to work. It was all about being able to work to survive. So if you went to his right, you were going to go to one of those forts and be shot. And if you went to the left, you were okay. You went back to the ghetto, at least for temporarily. And so most of Dad's family went to the left. Thank goodness. They were able to go to the left. At that time, two of his older brothers were gone already. They had fled successfully into Russia. He said they went on bicycles. So that was his older brother who did survive, and another younger brother who didn't survive. He ended up being taken into the Russian army. And if you were a Jew in the Russian army, you were on the front line, and you were heading to the front, and you weren't going to survive. That was his one brother. Two of his sisters were still with him. They were still together. And his little sister was gone. She actually got lost. Try to imagine everybody running, trying to get away again from the bombs. And so the story is she was on a wagon, and the horses bolted, and she flew off the wagon, and they lost her. But fortunately, there was a Lithuanian woman who picked her up, got her, and raised her. Actually adopted her and raised her as her own. So that's a real success story. And there's another example of a person doing good, who probably could have been shot for what she did. But she said that was my Aunt Raina, who survived, thanks to this woman. Her name is Zossi, and her name is at Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust main building museum in Jerusalem. And her name is up there as one of the righteous among the nations. So that's always a positive story, that Aunt Raina survived because she got lost and was taken in by a Lithuanian woman. So 1941, coldest winter, unbelievably cold. And Dad's job, now everybody had to work. You had to do something. So Dad's job was to work at the airport. And it was a horrible job because they had to walk 4 miles to get to the airport. And once they got there, they were working with shovels. And they were basically enlarging the airports because the Nazis always wanted to be able to use these airports, for their airplanes and jets as that came about later. So working at the airport, you got a little bit of soup for lunch, maybe a little bit of bread, and it was a long day. It was a long, long day. But fortunately, he was in good shape. He was 13. He was pretty strong, and he was able to withstand, that kind of difficult working situation. So that life kind of went on that way into 1942, and then at the end of 1942, the family was moved by train to Riga, which is in Latvia, which is a little bit north of Lithuania, kind of in the same area. And in Riga, things weren't so bad. They were working, again, they were always working. His mother was still alive, and his 2 sisters, and they would work in the kitchen, or they had shops where they were making clothing or repairing shoes or things like that. They were always doing something. And he says things weren't that bad because at that time it wasn't a ghetto yet. It was more of a labor camp, and it was run by the Luftwaffe, which is like the regular German army or air force. But then at some point in 1943, the SS took over, and the SS was very scary. These were the guys that were wearing, the black long coats, and they had the skull and crossbones, and he said that's when things got really tough there, really bad. If you couldn't work, you were sent off to another camp, which actually happened to his father and his mother. They got sent to another camp called Stutthof, which is another terrible camp. But Dad was lucky. He says there was a German officer that took a liking to him, and he remembers the guy's name. His name was Schumacher, and he asked Dad to help him transporting some firewood, and so Dad somehow he kind of got on the good side of some of these people, and ended up getting jobs again that was keeping him out of harm's way. But unfortunately, he lost his mother and father at that time. When Janelle introduced, she also mentioned another gentleman by the name of Howard Melton, who was Dad's friend from Kovno, and at this time they got close. They kind of had known each other, but Dad was a little bit older than Howard, but now they got very close to each other, and it was good to have somebody to help you, keep your spirits up and help you know what's going on. So Dad and Howard kind of became kind of a team right now. And they were always looking to get into a work situation, get into a transport where you're going to be working, not just sitting on the sand somewhere, because they weren't going to keep you around very long if you weren't useful. So this went on into 1944, and at some point in 1944, then the war was getting bad for Germany, right? They knew it. They knew it. The Russians were coming on the east, and the Americans had invaded Normandy, so the squeeze was on. So I think what they were trying to do was to cover their tracks, and they were moving people from place to place, and this is what started what they called the Death March that somebody else had mentioned. And at this point, they were kind of skin and bones. You know, they really weren't giving them much food, and they were working them. Somehow there was a food ration that came from the Red Cross, though. Somehow they did get that. And he always talks about how that saved his life. So one of the things that they got was a can of condensed milk. I don't know if you guys ever remember something like this, right? Eagle brand condensed milk, but it was a lifesaver because there was protein in here. And he always talks about how this, you know, he has a soft spot in his heart for it. So that's why I kind of brought it. I always thought, this is, you know, imagine if that saved your life. And they started the Death March. From the camp they were in, it took them about 10 days to march to Dachau. So that's where they ended up going, to Dachau. When he got there, again, they were very emaciated and starving, and but when they got there, they took a shower, and it was a real shower, and they actually let them change clothes. But he did say that he saw bodies laying around. You know, some of the cattle cars and that there were still bodies laying around, and so it was scary. It was very scary. They didn't know exactly what was going to happen. But they only stayed in Dachau for like a day. He said it was only like a day or two, and then they took off, continue walking south. So they're walking south from Dachau, which is in Munich in Germany, and supposedly they're heading toward the mountains, the Tyrolean mountains. And this was the Death March, and he always talks about one guy who had a piece of bread, and instead of eating it right away, he put it in his pocket. He wanted to save it, and he said, just like that, some guy just came in like an eagle. He said like an eagle. This guy just swooped in and stole this guy's bread. So, and those were Russian prisoners, because they were walking with Russian prisoners also. So he said if you had food, he said you had to eat it right away. You couldn't hang on to it. So they're walking, and they would walk at night instead of during the day, because the American planes were already coming. American planes were already coming and strafing the area, so they would walk at night. And if you fell down or you fell behind, you were going to be left behind or shot. And there was one instance where he did fall down, and the dog was on him, barking, and the dog actually woke him up, re-energized him and got him walking again. So again, that was kind of a good thing that happened to him. And probably about the 8th day or so, they laid down in a field, and of course they're surrounded by machine guns, soldiers with machine guns, and it was sort of a kind of a natural hollow kind of that they laid down in, and Dad and Howard kind of said their goodbyes. They thought that's it, that they're not going to keep them around. And they went to sleep in the field, and they woke up in the morning, and they were covered with snow. It had snowed a little bit, and soldiers were gone. They took off. They decided to just leave. So, fortunately, for whatever reason, maybe they were lucky, Maybe those guys just decided they were going to take off. They didn't want to be involved anymore. And later that day, they were able to walk to a farmer's barn, and the farmer cooked up a little soup for them. And later in the afternoon, some motorized vehicles showed up with white stars on them, and they didn't know what that was. They didn't know who the white stars were, but they were Americans. So they were liberated. May 2nd, 1945. So that's just a few days ago. I always like to ask them, where were you on this day? Where were you on April 18th? Where were you on April 29th? Where were you on May 2nd? So May 2nd, they were liberated. A little town called Bad Tolz is where they were actually liberated. And the American soldiers were giving out food and candy and chocolate, and unfortunately a lot of people got sick from that. A lot of people died because their systems weren't used to digesting that much food. So he got sick, and fortunately they took him to a hospital, and there was a nun that stayed with him. He tells a story. She stayed with him all night, checking on his fever, and got him through the emergency, and he survived that episode. So it's May of 1945, and he's in Germany, and now they have the new kind of camps. They call them DP camps for displaced persons. And he said that at first those camps didn't feel a whole lot different than the concentration camp, other than there weren't German guards there. Now there were American guards, but you still, your freedom was restricted. You had to stay inside, and they were mixed in with a lot of other peoples, a lot of other ethnic groups that were not so nice to Jews, like maybe some Ukrainians, maybe some Poles that didn't really care for Jews. So imagine being in this place all together like that. It was very uncomfortable. But at that time, President Truman started an investigation by a guy named Harrison. And this Mr. Harrison came up with a report that said that the Jews were being treated badly in these DP camps, and they'd be much better off if they were segregated. And that's what happened. They actually had like a DP camp for Jewish people then, and it was much better. There was also a moment where Dad and Howard thought about going back to Kovno. And there's an interesting story he tells where there were some guys who were from Kovno, and Howard went to meet them on a train, and then this guy said, no, don't go back to Kovno. It's very dangerous there. It's still not good for Jews. So that was lucky. It was lucky they didn't go back. But in the meantime, they stayed in Germany until December of 1947. So that's May of 1945 to December of 1947. So that's over 2 years that Dad and Howard are in Germany, basically alone. Dad is now 17, 18 in a foreign country without any help. He did find out through some other people that his mother had perished in Stutthof, and also his two sisters. They survived, but they got sick. They got typhoid. So a lot of people died from disease and starvation, in addition to being shot and gassed and all the other ways. So Dad was able to come to this country in December 1947 through what they called the Orphans Act that President Truman actually passed. And if you were 19 or younger and you had a sponsor in this country, you were able to come here. So Dad didn't know anybody here, but there was a Jewish agency that actually put up the money for him to come over. And then to follow through that, he actually got a job, which he did. He came to Milwaukee, No, I'm sorry, he came to New York. He came to New York, stayed in New York for about 2 weeks, didn't like New York. It was too many people. And some guy there just said, hey, why don't you go to Milwaukee? There are a lot of German people in Milwaukee. Dad speaks German. And the geography is very similar to Lithuania, green, hilly, and that. So said, okay. So he came to Milwaukee and was able to get a job right away and just started working. And then later Howard came and joined him, and they spent the rest of their lives together in Milwaukee. Both of them got married, had families. We celebrated holidays together. We still see some of the Melton family. Howard passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago from COVID. And he had been a prolific speaker. He had did a lot of speaking at schools, and so did Dad. The two of them would go together and speak, and it was interesting how they had a contrast in how their speaking styles were. But Dad always said that at the end of his talks, he would always say that the thing to remember is that hate is a terrible thing. That's how he'd always end it. Hate is a terrible thing. And I think we all know that too, that, rhetoric, Auschwitz is one thing. How did that start though? Way over here with hate speech, blaming, right? That kind of thing. So he always said he never held a grudge against Germany or the German people. Dad and Howard and my mother and Howard's wife, I mean, they traveled, they went to Europe together, they went to Germany, they went back to places where they had been. So I feel very fortunate that Dad was able to come through those 4 years. And I think the reason he did it is because he knew how good life was. He was 13 when the war started, so up until that point, they were poor, but they were happy. They enjoyed life. So I think once the war ended, he just wanted to get back to that kind of a life. I met my mother, which was very lucky because it was love at first sight, and that was it. So he always says just had a great life. They were married 67 years. Mom passed away 4 years ago now. So it's basically a good ending to the story for my father, that he was able to survive the way he did. And I often think, like, how did he do that? How did he, I don't think I'd be able to do that in those kind of conditions, that cold, and working at that airport. I mean, I'm sure he didn't have gloves and a hat and all that. But he'll say, oh yeah, you could have done it. You could have survived. So I don't know for sure if any of us could. But we always leave it with a positive message, that there were some good things, and there were some righteous people who took a chance to save my aunt, and Dad did his resistance by burning his stamp collection, and I guess that's his story. So, thank you for listening.
I think now we can open up for questions and answers, if that's okay. I have a question. What is your father's name?
Albert.
Albert.
Albert, yeah.
Okay.
Albert, or actually in Lithuania it was Avram, or Abraham, really.
And so when he was working, was he in a camp or was he just working? How did that work?
Well, in Kovno, it wasn't a camp yet. It was a ghetto. Okay. And the other places where he was working, yes, those were camps. There was a whole bunch of names that sometimes I remember them and sometimes I forget. They always tell me where he was at all these different places. Studov was one. But they were mainly labor camps, concentration camps, yeah.
Okay, do we have questions? Just raise your hand. Oops, tennis shoes.
I was just wondering how you reconnected with your aunt.
Good question. So Aunt Riva, this woman, they lived in Latvia. And after the war, Dad's older brother, Uncle Laser, who had gotten away on the bicycle, the two of them got away on bicycles. The younger one died because he was in a Russian army. But Uncle Laser, he survived. And he found her. And my dad went to Russia in 1970. He went to Russia to reconnect with his family. And that's when he connected with her. They got to this country sometime in the mid-1980s, like 1985. But Dad went to Russia in 1970, which was actually a very dangerous thing to do at that time because it was still the Soviet Union, and they weren't letting Jews out yet at that time. So it was actually a very risky thing that he did. My mother was not happy with that, but he did it. But yeah, she survived. Married a wonderful man, and they had two boys, and they lived in California. So we went to visit them there several times, and that it is really a great story how she survived. Good question.
I would like to know if your father ever got deployed.
I'm sorry, I can't hear that. Did he?
Did he ever reach a point where he could forgive?
Forgive? Oh. That's a good question. I don't know. You know, they talk about forgive and forget, right? I think he did, actually, in his heart, I think he did forgive, the German people as a whole. I don't think he held any grudges in that way. Lithuanian people, and again, it's hard to say about a whole group of people, right? But unfortunately, at that time, in Lithuania, for different reasons, people were very anti-Semitic. And they started doing things even before the Nazis got there. They didn't need a whole lot of support. So I think it'd be safe to say that he did forgive because, living with him my whole life, I've seen a man who doesn't hold a grudge. So I think as far as forgiving goes, I think he did. I think he did because he didn't hold it against an entire people for what happened. We know that it was. We know why. I often think if I could go back in time, I wish I could have been that art teacher, Hitler's art teacher, right? And I would have said, "Great job, Adolf. We're gonna allow you into this art school now." But we know that didn't happen, right? And, after that, things went downhill.
So
Questions?
When he got to America, was he welcomed? Was there anti-Semitism? I've heard many stories about people being turned away when they first came.
Yeah, that's interesting. People were turned away. No, he didn't say that. He said actually Milwaukee was. I didn't hear any anti-Semitism there from him, and Milwaukee actually grew sort of this whole community of survivors. They called it them green because they were new to America. But no, Milwaukee really wasn't, it seemed like it was a pretty good place to go. There wasn't really a whole lot of anti-Semitism. I don't know if people are out there welcoming, with signs and banners, welcome. But it was a different time back then too. The refugees, they didn't want to talk about things, right? They didn't want to talk about, everybody wanted to kind of just forget about what had happened. And assimilation, was the strategy. So, but they were very lucky in Milwaukee. They had a great network of people, and that's how people found their spouses, and they did things socially. He still talks about all those people and their kids' names and the weddings they went to, and so it was actually a pretty good environment in Milwaukee. It's funny you mentioned that though, because he tells a story of when they were still back in the DP camp back in Germany. They went to there was some kind of a Jewish group. It wasn't Ort. I'm not sure what it was, but they wouldn't help them. He says, we went there and we asked them, they wouldn't do anything for them. So again, they were kind of on their own over there. I just thought that was kind of interesting.
So, as the second generation, as a child of a survivor, how do you think that his experiences have influenced you positively and negatively? Because there's so many studies coming out now, not only discussing the impact on the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
The second generation, but now they're going to the third generation as well, particularly in Israel. So how do you feel that it affected you?
Well, people will ask me, well, how did you find out? Right? How did you find out about the Holocaust? And I can't say that I remember a particular day that Dad sat me down and said, all right, Jeff, I want to tell you about the Holocaust. It wasn't like that. It was almost more like osmosis, kind of like it was in the house, and you just sort of knew. I had hunted through some desk drawers that we had, and I found a letter, and I always thought the letter was unique because it had an envelope that had like red and blue squares around the outside, and it turned out it was from the Red Cross, and it was a statement about my grandmother, saying that as far as they knew, that she had died in 1944 in Stutthof. And so I knew that, well, this is weird. Why is this here? And so it was just sort of like putting things together. And we used to celebrate Hanukkahs with the Meltons. And I was thinking somewhere of these Hanukkahs, somebody must have said something about Dad and Howard when they were back, in Germany. So, but I don't remember exactly him explaining it to me. It was just sort of like osmosis, and it just came through the fibers. But how it's affected me, a lot. It has. I think being educated, I guess. I have a master's degree, library science, but it's helped me, and just doing this helps me in understanding it, putting it in perspective. Whereas my brothers, I have two brothers, and they both struggle. My one brother particularly struggles with it. And when I talk to him, I try to make him see that, it's you can't really understand it. The scope of it was so huge, the way it happened, and I'm always learning more things about it too, and that just kind of helps put it in some kind of crazy perspective. But yeah, we've had our issues. We've had some issues, definitely, personal issues that that we've all had to deal with. But life is full of challenges, right? And this is, like he'll say, well, Dad had 13 good years. He'd say, but we were born into it. That's his perspective on it, right? Like that's you're talking about transgenerational trauma, that kind of thing, which there's a lot more evidence for that now. So I look at my dad, the way Dad lived his life, and like I say, once he got here, he wanted to enjoy life. So I feel very lucky that emotionally he was able to, compartmentalize things so it didn't ruin the rest of his life. Being, having an agenda against the world. Although what's happened in October 7th has sort of reunited some of those feelings.
Especially being older.
Yeah.
And having, they look back at the past. How was he?
Yeah, very badly. Can't believe that. Really, is this happening again? So, yeah, it's tough.
Question over here.
Questions over on this side.
Have you ever, in your speech, in your talks, or with your father, encountered a denier? And how did you handle it?
No, I've been lucky. I've been lucky so far. They teach us at HERC, the Speakers Bureau, that if not to get into that, I'm here to tell my father's story. I'm not here to defend, this is first person account. Well, through a second person, I guess. So it's not technically first person, but it's probably about as close as you can get. So a denier, actually, that's why Howard started speaking in the 70s, because that's when the denial movement really got going. There was a professor from Northwestern, I believe, that wrote, he wrote a book, and this couldn't have happened, and there couldn't have been that many people, and that, as soon as you do that, that's when you get all the other people get their juices going, and no, it did happen. It really did. Where's my grandmother? Where's my grandfather? Where's my aunt and my uncle? Why don't I know where they're buried? There's so no, I haven't. And if I did have a denier, I'd probably want to sit down with them, with that person one on one, and bring in some evidence and talk about what really happened. There's so much evidence. I mean, it's like saying the earth is flat. Although there might be people that still believe that. Okay? Any other, yes?
Have you written down, or your dad, when he was younger, written down his stories or recording his stories?
Yeah, I've written some little things for the Herc newspaper. He's been interviewed many, many times, the Spielberg interview and other ones. I do have a PowerPoint that I have. He was interviewed in Milwaukee in 10 years ago now by Ben Marins. And that was, so in 45 minutes, he really tells his story. 45 minutes, that's pretty much it. Actually, there's somebody right now that's looking to write a book and wants to interview him. It's a teacher in the Mequon area. McBride, her name is, and she's done a lot with the Holocaust. So she's thinking about writing a book. So for me right now, this is good. I like just telling this story, and of course, I left out a lot of the details, which I don't think are real necessary. But so I don't want to make it sound like it was a picnic or anything back there, But it was really bad. Where they were in Kovno, that was the front line. That was like day one, and they didn't have a chance. That's why 1 out of 10. So 90% didn't survive. Jews didn't survive in Lithuania. That was the highest percentage of any country. Not number, but percentage. 90%. So, yeah.
What's a death march?
When? What was it?
What's a death march?
Yeah, okay, good question. Well, again, toward the end of the war, when the Germans could see that it was over, even though he made old people and kids fight until the end, which was ridiculous. But I think what they're trying to do is march the prisoners away from the camp so there wouldn't be evidence of what happened. I'm not sure exactly what the rationale was behind the death march, but I think that was part of it, is they wanted to they were trying to get rid of the evidence, and then at the end there was no time, so I think they figured, let's just march them out and get away as far away from the camp as they could, Dachau. And again, these marches were brutal. You know, they had to keep up. There wasn't much food, and if you were lost along the way, you were shot or just done away with. So that's why they thought when they went to bed that night, May 1st, right that night, they said their goodbyes, Dad and Howard, because they thought that's it. You know, they're done. But as it were, they woke up in the morning. They were covered with a little bit of snow, and the soldiers were gone. So they survived that death march. I think he said of the march that they went, there was like 2,000 people. And there were Jews and there were Russian prisoners too, prisoners of war. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Hello, I'm Reverend Kathleen Gloff, and I am a part of the committee that helped to plan this memorial service. And I am here to say thank you. First of all, thank you to our speaker, Jeff Better. We want to thank all of the Indian Trail faculty and students who participated. We want to thank the Indian Trail Orchestra, and you will be hearing from them as a postlude, so please remain seated through that. And the Indian Trail Choir, led by John Shea. And I want to briefly take a moment to say I belong to a group called Wisdom Wisconsin, Congregations United to Serve Humanity, or CUSH, which exists here in Kenosha, is part of the statewide organization of Wisdom Wisconsin. And in Wisdom Wisconsin, we have 3 abiding, guiding principles that guide us. And one is living for the 7th generation. We share that with Indigenous people across our continent. So thank you for being here to hear the stories of those who suffered so greatly and to remember the stories of those who suffered so greatly during World War II, all of the Jewish people and all of the others who suffered with them. But I would remind you that we resist tyranny in our current day and age as well. And generations from now, people will look back, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and wonder, how did my grandparents resist the tyranny that they faced in the 21st century? So go forth and resist the tyranny that you find today, remembering those who taught us the way to resist tyranny from this event. Please remain seated until after the postlude. Thank you for being here.